Hi, and welcome to the Environment TV Forum. I'm Charlie Olson, your host and moderator. For today, we'll be talking about greenhouse gases, our right to reuse things by repairing them, and protecting our diversity with the birds and bees. Joining us today as members of the forum are Ken Gale from WBAI's Ecologic radio broadcast, Mark Latour, a land management expert, Lenny Librizzi, a social ecologist, and Marilyn Elie, a clean energy advocate.
Every day is Earth Day. I'm Ken Gale.
I'm Sally Gellert.
And I'm Donna Stein. Every week we bring you environmental experts and activists, plus news, in-depth information, and solutions to environmental problems.
Join us at our new time, Wednesdays at 10 a.m., right here on WBAI New York, 99.5 FM, and WBAI.org.
Wednesday mornings, 10 a.m. When your air or water are clean, thank an environmentalist. If not, become one. Enough said.
Put up a parking lot.
Every spring, Atlantic horseshoe crabs mate, as they have for more than 240 million years. During the full moon peak high tide, they crawl onto local beaches, mate, and the female lays as many as 80,000 eggs in the sand. The baby crabs emerge 2 weeks later when the next peak high tide allows them to get into the water. Some don't make it, as they are a high-protein food source for shorebirds and fish. They are still around, so their method of procreation continues to succeed. Despite its menacing look, a horseshoe crab's pointed tail is not a weapon. It's a steering mechanism and helps them turn their bodies over if they become stuck on their back.
We'd like to talk now about greenhouse gases. And as a beginning intro to greenhouse gases, Ken Gale has put something together, and we will start with that. Ken?
Yeah, it drives me crazy, the term greenhouse gases, because you're sort of assuming that people know what a greenhouse is, how it works, and why a greenhouse gas is similar to how a greenhouse works. And environmentalists, environmental activists, we use the word greenhouse gases all the time. And I think you can forget that not everybody is as intimately familiar with the term as we are. And when I'm saying this in public, how many people here have ever been in a greenhouse? There are some greenhouses in Manhattan, in New York City, but how many people have actually been in one? You've been in your own, haven't you, Lenny? And yeah, greenhouses are fascinating when you learn about them, because they have a glass roof or a clear plastic roof. And when sunlight goes through the roof, it changes into heat. Some of it, not all of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see, right? And so the heat has a different wavelength of energy than light does. So when the heat is inside the greenhouse, it can't get out. The light can get back out, but the heat can't, so it accumulates. And every greenhouse somewhere has some sort of valve that reads the temperature, and when it gets too hot in there, because it will, if it's 0 degrees outside, a greenhouse will still get too hot, and you have to vent some of that heat. That's how effective and efficient a greenhouse is, that you have to vent the heat from it. And it's fascinating. You go in the winter and you've got sweaters and coats on, and then you suddenly need to take them off because you're in a greenhouse surrounded by all that weather. You needed zero. And it's just fascinating. So that's how a greenhouse works. And greenhouse gases in the atmosphere work the same way as that glass roof. When light from the sun goes through those molecules, I use the word molecule, goes through the molecules of a greenhouse gas, then it changes the wavelength, and now you've got more heat. And the heat is going to be absorbed by the Earth. It's going to get trapped in the atmosphere, and it's going to get warmer and warmer. That's the global warming part of climate chaos. There's more to climate change, climate chaos, climate crisis than global warming, but that's where that comes from, is the way the sunlight goes in. And some people that think that's the only part of climate chaos, and we talked about that in our last show. But if you think about your own experience, right? I think every person has gone into a car that's sitting in a parking lot on a sunny day, and the car is really hot, and people put little pseudo umbrellas in the car to keep it from getting that hot, and that's how greenhouses work. The light goes through there, turns into heat, and it accumulates in the car. And when you open the car door, you want to keep it open for a while to let the heat out. Right? That's how greenhouses work. There's a lot of different ways of making an analogy, but I think everybody has been in the car. And that you may hear about carbon, right? The environmental activists have to deal with carbon. What does that mean? And what that's short for is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. And when the sunlight goes through carbon dioxide, when enough sunlight goes through it, that molecule can be destroyed. And so you no longer have that greenhouse gas molecule up there. But it takes a while. And since we're putting more and more of it into the air every single minute, we're not going to get rid of it anytime soon because we're accumulating it. And all that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is making the Earth warmer. Now, millions of years ago, when there was an ice age, that carbon dioxide was making things warm enough so it could be the temperature now. I have heard from enough conservatives who say carbon dioxide is natural. You're breathing it right now. So why are you against carbon dioxide? I'm against too much carbon dioxide. There's a difference, right? Arsenic is natural. It's in your body right now. Hey, you want some more? I mean, there's a lot of ridiculous ways of making an analogy about carbon dioxide being natural.
The question is, where does all this carbon dioxide come from? And that's the crux of the problem, I believe.
Yeah, we're burning stuff. We're burning things that would not have turned into carbon dioxide because they'd be sitting in the ground as coal, as oil, as gas, and then we take them out and we burn them. And when we burn them, we're making carbon dioxide and water. That would be the chemical formula. Is C of whatever the fuel is, plus O2 of the oxygen that you're using to burn it with, and you're getting carbon dioxide. And if it's a hydrocarbon, then the oxygen also gives you water. That's why I can say that, water vapor. And we're burning so much, right? That oil, that coal, that gas took literally millions of years to develop, and we're burning it in a few decades. So of course there's too much of it. There's more than the Earth has the ability to deal with, right? Plants absorb carbon dioxide, but there comes to a point they can't absorb anymore. And there also comes to a point when the extra heat slows down the photosynthesis process. So the global warming part of climate change is making plants less efficient. And every living creature on Earth needs plants to survive except for fungi. And so if the animals have no plants to eat, then they die. If humans don't have plants and animals to eat, they die. So when photosynthesis of plants gets slowed down because there's too much heat, all right, it's endangering all life on this planet, and there is no other planet we can go to. Never mind going to Mars. You're not going to get the entire population of Earth on Mars, and that's a horrible place to live anyway. And it's just amazing. There's just too much. There's just too much. And then a worse greenhouse gas is methane. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for the United Nations, done by 300 scientists, from dozens of countries, including the United States, right? The big fossil fuel company, yeah, United States was involved in writing the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they reached consensus. So it wasn't like, these scientists are outvoting those scientists. They reached consensus, right? Every word that went into that document was agreed on by all the scientists. And you'll see several times it talks about the comparison of carbon dioxide and methane. Methane is CH4. One carbon atom, 4 hydrogen atoms makes a methane molecule. Natural gas is how it's marketed. Methane is what it is. And I call it methane because when it's in the atmosphere of Jupiter, they call it methane. So, when it's a greenhouse gas, they call it methane. So why no, let's market it as what it really is. But the point is that methane is, when it's first emitted, there's some wonderful charts, and then they just say outright, it's 120 times more violent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. It's 120 times worse when first emitted. In about 10 years, it's only about 80 sometimes worse. And in 100 years, it's still 10 times worse than carbon dioxide. So to say that, oh, well, in 100 years, it's only 10 times worse, it's still worse. And what about now? I'm living right now. I'm not living 100 years from now. I doubt it very much. 120 times worse methane is than carbon dioxide. That's a greenhouse gas.
That was an excellent example of what a greenhouse gas is, and feeling it for all people. I think the actual greenhouse plant place as well as the car place. Now, the biggest problem I see next is the politics of this, getting it across to other people's mentality, because I think that a lot of them don't believe it. The first chain reaction is, you're a Democrat, so you're a communist, a socialist, so we can't trust you because you collectively want to take over the whole world and then tell us what to eat, what to drink, what to drive, how to work, and all the rest of that. So I see them saying that. But to a lot of other people, they seem to be saying, and I haven't done a survey on that, they seem to be saying the greenhouse gas and your car is something easily containable. Why isn't the Earth, which is many times bigger and going in different directions, up and down, as well as right and left, and actually right and left and front and back, it's three-dimensional? Why aren't these molecules just being changed and absorbed? And how are we really affecting? How much time is this going to take to really cause a gigantic effect that harms humanity?
Say about 50 to 100 years ago. It's already messing up humanity.
But many of these conservatives and other people just can't believe that it is that much of a problem at this time. And wondering how to get that across to them.
It seems like no matter what you say, they don't believe in science. I think that's the point. As Ken mentioned, the scientists all came up with a consensus wording of what the issue was. And even if you tell them those facts, oh, well, that's, that's political. And it's not. But how do you convince them that it's not?
Mark, go ahead.
Right. Yeah, they don't want to believe it, basically. I mean, it's an inconvenient truth. It's going to negatively impact their profits. And so profits of these companies. So a lot of these folks just want that information to go away.
I think was it John Updike who said that it's hard to teach somebody something if their income relies on them not knowing it. And certainly people have uncovered documents from ExxonMobil, for example, where they knew about climate change and they knew that their product was creating that hazard. And their reaction was to cover it up as much as they could. Creating a think tank in Annapolis that would have some people with PhDs after their names who could say, oh, there's no such thing. And when I first started Ecologic was 2002. And I remember reading about grad students researching every single paper they could find that talked about climate change or global warming or anything of the sort, trying to find a scientist who disagreed. And after one grad student, 1,000 papers, another one, 1,500 papers, they couldn't find anybody. And they said that the only disagreement was how bad it was. At what point will there be so much carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere that even if we didn't emit one molecule more, it would be too late? And that's where scientists argue. At what point it'll be too late? For some of them, they say it already has. But we can mitigate it. We can stop putting it out, and we can do things to absorb the carbon dioxide, such as grow trees. I should say grow forests. It's the difference between forests and trees. But instead they're cutting them down and putting in single crop things that they use to burn. So much of the Brazilian rainforest has gone that way. So there are things we can do. The politics. As soon as Lenny mentioned the politics, I thought of Texas during the heat wave last year, when they had 110-degree days for like a week.
Mm-hmm.
And though the winter before, a terrible storm knocked down the entire grid, it didn't happen with the heat wave. And people were using the air conditioners. They didn't care. I want my own comfort. And the grid didn't go down. And they realized it was because of the amount of solar energy being used. The solar panels were making electricity. And so there was enough electricity for everybody, because during the heat wave last year that somebody calculated, there was twice as much solar power in Texas as the year before. And that this year it's on track to be more than twice as much as that. And so the governor of this state looked at the article in Texas Magazine saying that it was solar panels that kept the grid from going down, and saying that's not true. That's not why the grid went down. Everybody should continue to burn as much stuff as they can and support the fossil fuel industry that's supporting the great state of Texas. They ignored their own magazine, their own people, their own logic, everything.
So
Politics.
you've explained very well and illustrated very well what greenhouse gases are. I think that's amazing. I'd say everybody should applaud that. What do you guys think? Did a good job.
Excellent.
The next thing is, how do you get that? Go ahead, Ken. Mark, you were going to say something?
It was excellent. I did have a question though for Ken.
Go
I'm
ahead.
hearing about, methane being invisible. I don't know if it has odor, but that from satellites now we're spotting methane leaks that we didn't know had actually been there before. And where are these leaks coming from? And is it possible to, minimize those leaks?
Oh, that's a great question. There are big methane sinks in Siberia. When a forest is flooded, you get methane. Whenever anything, when you think of a piece of fruit spoiling and goes bad and it turns color and it shrivels up and everything else, that's carbon dioxide reacting with the fruit and various microbes. If there is no carbon dioxide, if that fruit was buried and it rotted with different microbes without carbon dioxide, that would give off methane. Anaerobic bacteria create methane, and they're creating massive amounts of methane where there have been flooded forests, where there are garbage dumps. Garbage dumps create a lot of methane. In some places, they're capturing some of that methane. You may have seen pipes on top of some garbage dumps. Some pipes are venting the methane, more greenhouse gases already, and some are capturing it. So they're using the anaerobic bacteria to create a fuel, but not all of that methane becomes fuel. It always escapes, not to mention leaks in pipelines if they use that to transport it somewhere. I was with a biologist at Ashokan Nature Center in upstate New York in the Catskills, and she went to the edge of the water with this big old funnel, and she held the funnel with the pointy part up, and she held it just over the water, and she stirred the bottom of the water. And then after, just maybe 10, 15 seconds, I think, she then lit the top of the funnel, because what she was doing was there was organic material on the bottom of the water, and there was anaerobic bacteria eating it and creating methane. And the methane was trapped underwater. So her stick stirring the bottom let loose the methane, and her funnel caught it so that she could light it on fire. There's methane everywhere. It's possible that some of the explosions at the Bermuda Triangle were methane explosions, big methane bubbles underneath the water that came up. Siberia has got all these sinks. They're depressions in the land, and where these depressions are, there's methane under there. And sometimes it's leaking out slowly, and sometimes it's leaking out very quickly and can literally explode. And so
And
they're
that
finding there's so many sources now that they never knew about, because how many people go to Siberia?
I want to also make the point that all of these things you're talking about, the greenhouse gases, there's a synergistic effect. So it's not just carbon dioxide over here and methane over there, but that together they're actually causing more problems, and they're heating.
Yeah.
The heat is staying in the atmosphere. And earlier, when before we started recording, we were talking about water vapor as a greenhouse gas. And that what's happening now, that the other gases have caused the heat to stay in the atmosphere. Water vapor, the evaporation of transpiration, and all those things that go on in our hydrologic cycle, the hotter atmosphere holds more moisture, and now we get worse hurricanes, thunderstorms, rainfalls, all of this kind of stuff. So it's you have to talk about all these things in context with each other to kind of explain this, and obviously then it gets too complicated and people start rolling their eyes, and well, you use the word molecule.
And the IPCC report said we have to do everything. And then I'll read magazines from, I don't want to mention their names because they're otherwise good magazines, who say, oh, don't worry about carbon dioxide, only worry about methane. And then this magazine goes, oh, don't worry about methane, only worry about carbon dioxide. So how about worrying about both and dealing with both and mitigating both so that we don't have to worry about either of them anymore? And
The
instead of picking
biggest
and choosing,
problem
we
seems to
have to
be,
do everything.
I agree, we have to do everything. And that's the big part of the biggest problem, is because so many people say, in order to change and cut down any of these greenhouse gases, and there are plenty of them, different names of them, we can list them here, society has to change. How I work, how I drive, how I go to school, how I get my energy, my electricity, how we fly, how we go by boats. All of life has to change, basically. And that brings in the words socialism, communism, or organized society, as if we were one religion. It's a big, big change. And that's similar to changing things, going back to a military dictatorship, or letting a religion in a feudal society tell you what to do, going back to the Pharaoh's way of living. But basically, everybody would have to agree that this is our lifestyle in order to change that. And that is the next hardest thing to get across to people, that it may not be everything, but just a bunch of things. You've illustrated beautifully an example of what a greenhouse gas is. And we can explain it to people. I can throw more charts up there, or we can find more charts showing how much is dumped by different industries, and there are books on that kind of stuff. But the next thing is to make a plan. And that goes beyond what we're talking here. We can mention one or two things, but that's the next step to get through to these people, that they do have to change. We do have to change, organize together, as if it was a Sputnik kind of thing, or a World War II Western civilization against the Nazis and other civilizations.
I don't think society has to change as much as government has to change.
Or
And by that, I
government.
mean, we have to get rid of the socialism for the rich that our government does now. Because they give so much of our tax money goes to the fossil fuel companies. Don't do that, right? Let them have to make their profit on their product, not on government subsidies.
So you're saying use the capitalist system.
Yeah. Be more capitalist, not less.
Mhm.
And that's the problem with a lot of governments, is that in order to be elected, it takes money. And so somebody will give you money to get elected, and then you give some of the taxpayer money to them because they helped you get elected. And
Well,
that's
that
a
sounds like a
cycle that's been
that's
going on, way before the United States existed.
that sounds like a
Uh,
great solution. It really
but
does. But at some point,
Amy
we're going to have.
Levins makes a point: stop giving subsidies to renewable energy and fossil fuel and nuclear power, and see who comes out on top. How can fossil fuel and nuclear compete with free energy from the sun and free energy from the wind? They couldn't
It's
compete. So if they
it
didn't get
sounds
government
wonderful.
subsidies and they didn't get free insurance from the Price-Anderson Act for nuclear, they wouldn't survive. And so all of a sudden, we'd have more tax money for things like teachers and stuff like that, because they wouldn't be giving it away to the wealthiest people in this country,
And we
or the
just
wealthiest
have to
people who
get
live
that.
outside this country
We
in a lot of their cases.
and Ken Gale, we'd have to get that idea across to those people and have them agree. And so, as of now, this is a good place to end this for right now.
I want to make one more point.
Go ahead.
If we're going to have less carbon dioxide and less methane going into the air, being more efficient with what we do use and what we do buy, so that we get 10 times as much power from the electricity we use, and therefore they won't have to burn as much. So that'll lower the amount of fossil fuels, the amount of greenhouse gases, just by being more efficient. And what'll also happen, you'll have money in your pocket, because you won't be giving it to your utility. You get to go to a restaurant or buy something that you couldn't afford to buy because you're not giving that money to the utility.
I think that's an excellent set of ideas, and we keep repeating them because they fit in with all the things we're talking about on the environment, and so they are excellent. But as of now, we've talked about the greenhouse gas effect and what is a greenhouse gas and what is the effect of that, and we're going to continue with the other parts that we've talked about here, which is how do we actually get people to see the scientific facts as we see them, and how do we increase the other methods of efficiency and use of energy. So this will be a continuing topic that we will come back to. So I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time at this time.
It seems like someone at the New York Times has been listening or watching our show, because we did an episode that included climate mitigation strategies. And just today, there was a pretty extensive article in the Times about what they are changing to, or to calling, climate interventions. And the reporter David Gellerts talked a lot about these plants in both Iceland and Midland, Texas, which are capturing carbon from the environment, and also brought up some of the other strategies. People out there listening to us or watching us.
March 14th, in addition to being Pi Day, was this year's Earth Overshoot Day for the United States. That is the calculated day on which humanity's resource consumption for the year would exceed Earth's capacity to regenerate those resources that year if everyone lived like the US population. For the world as a whole, Earth Overshoot Day this year will be July 25th. According to the Global Footprint Network, until the early 1970s, human consumption was within Earth's capacity to regenerate annually. We are on track to require 2 planets' resources by the middle of this century.
Mark Latour has been looking at legislation on environmental laws and has told me that he has seen quite a lot, and he has quite a lot to present to us. But we only have a certain amount of time in this forum here to talk about that. So he's chosen at least 2 of them, even though he'd like to speak more on them. So I'm going to let Mark begin his discussion on the, I think the first one is going to be about the Birds and the Bees Act. So Mark, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. It's a very important piece of legislation. It came in just at the very beginning of 2024. It relates to the state of New York. And here in New York State, we've got 200 species of bees. We've got over 400 species of birds. And there's been a lot of trouble with the bee and the bird populations, having a lot to do with insecticides and pesticides. The most egregious one are called neonics, or the full name is, I don't even know if I can pronounce it, neonicotinoids, but neonics is what we call them for short. But they're a problem because the pollinators, the birds, bees, bats, butterflies, they're essential to reproduction of so many plant species. They're involved in cross-pollination. They're essential for genetic diversity in these plant species. And the plants, of course, are a primary food source, not only for humans, but for animals as well. So it's a serious matter. Some people even refer to it as an Armageddon with the decline of these pollinators. So this bill was signed into law early 2024. Neonics are basically among the widest used products in crop protection. They're widely employed for even veterinary purposes, including tick and flea control.
The neonics are a pre-emergent pesticide. Is that correct, Mark?
Well, they're sprayed onto the seeds of these various crops, and they are meant to infiltrate all aspects of the plant, of the weed, to kill the weed, but not that much actually is absorbed into the plant, generally less than 5%. So you've got the neonics being absorbed into the soil, which causes harm to the soil everywhere, and to more and more species that we're not trying to kill off. So beneficial species, the great majority of the species. It's one thing if it just attacks the boll weevils or the rusts or things like that, the bugs, but it's harming too many good species, too many valuable species.
Well, and I guess the point is that it makes its way throughout the entire plant, as you said, including the pollen, which the butterflies and bees and birds feed on. And that's where it affects the birds and the bees.
That's right. So it's getting into their systems, and they're there not just in a one-time exposure, but they're continually. They're chronically there, building up in larger and larger amounts. So it's killing off many, many bees, some birds, butterflies, bats.
And I've
Mark,
been to sorry, Ken, go ahead.
I wanted to ask Mark if the law protects native species of bees or just honeybees.
The law protects whatever species, bees or otherwise, are adversely impacted by the neonics. So it's minimizing legitimate applications of neonics.
So beetles too, because beetles do a lot of pollinating.
Yes. It depends on which type of beetle, but some
Right.
beetles are beneficial, others are harmful.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that if you go to a nursery and ask them, were the seeds of this plant treated with neonics, they will not know the answer to that question.
Right.
It's a really important law, because otherwise we have no way of knowing how the plant or the seed has been treated before it gets to us.
Right. So it's there's all sorts of problems that are caused, particularly in bees. So, for example, leads to difficulty navigating because it's undermining their nervous system, the bees, the birds, etc. Leads to difficulties with learning, difficulties foraging, a suppressed immune response, lower sperm viability, shortened lifespan of queen bees, and reduced numbers of new queen bees. So it's hurting the bees, more than any other species.
I saw a honeybee wandering around the sidewalk like it was looking for a flower. It was completely
Yes.
disoriented. Instead of getting the little bee dance where they tell it where the flowers are and then going right to it, it was lost. And I suspect
Sure.
never got home.
Right.
I
So
think
it's most
one of the
likely due
reasons.
to the neonics.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the reasons it took this law so long to get passed was because there was opposition to it. There was a lot of opposition upstate by farmers and also by turf building companies and lawn companies that tend our lawns, and that's something we have to look at for this and ask them what they're doing and look very carefully before they put something on lawns. But the Sierra Club had a big deal among members trying to get this passed with letters to the governor and letters to the editor and everything. So they've been working on it for about the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I guess, and close but not close enough. So it was a real celebration this year when the governor finally passed it. And it's a shame, but we have to look at these commercial competing interests for things like this. And one of the reasons they got it through was because they delayed the startup date. And that's another part of the give and take of the legislative process.
Absolutely. Another thing is that the state did a study on what is the effectiveness of these neonics, generally very ineffective. So farmers are spending all sorts of money and not really getting that much of a return. In addition, the neonics, other than the species I mentioned, they're adversely impacting more than half of all of the endangered or threatened species in the United States. So, of course, we all knew about DDT from the 1960s or so. So this is the next worse pesticide or insecticide that's causing so much harm.
But they're also affecting kids because you're putting poison on your lawn, and then the kid runs on the lawn more often than not in bare feet, and that poison is going into their skin. And so they're hurting their own kids without realizing it because it's sold as if it's benign.
Right. So it's definitely harming the development of children. It's entering our water system. So we're drinking it, or we're cooking with it. And one report showed that for pregnant women, 95% of them are absorbing more and more higher levels of neonics. So it's impacting the fetuses leading to birth defects, such as heart and brain birth defects, reduced cognitive abilities, autism-like symptoms, and additional threats to young children.
We've had a number of people in New York State fighting some of these poisons. I'm trying to think of Roundup. Is Roundup one of these niconics?
Many states in the
That's a
United
different
States.
pesticide.
It's a different pesticide, but it's under the neonics.
No,
Thanks,
different
Lenny.
chemistry.
Yeah, okay. Well, there's separate legislation. There have been a lot of movements to ban it in Europe, in the European Union, in
Successful
California.
movements.
Yeah,
We're talking about
Yeah.
Roundup right now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
there's
there's-
been a lot of lawsuits by farmers and people that worked for parks departments that were, their health was severely damaged by Roundup. It's been several mega lawsuits that have happened. I know one in California for sure, but that hasn't happened with neonics. So hopefully we'll get it off the market before that's an issue.
So this law in New York State and these other states is only for the neonics.
This is only a New York State law. It's not necessarily other states. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, this is the New York state law, and it doesn't completely ban the use of neonics. So if farmers have a crop that really needs the neonics and nothing else will work, they can get a waiver. And but still, there should be a tremendous reduction in the use of neonics. So if you look at the province of Quebec, where they've been banned fairly recently, there are virtually no economic losses to the farmers, and the use of neonics fell by about 90%.
But is this New York State law solely against the neonics? It's not touching Roundup and other kinds of pesticides.
One of the aspects of this bill is that specifically it's targeting corn, soybean, and wheat seeds. that some other legislation in other states or countries may not have targeted.
I think I mentioned this before, but I listened to or watched the podcast of beekeepers in Vermont who were very jealous of the fact that New York State has passed this law and Vermont hasn't. And of course, Vermont shares a very long border with New York. So, you know, these things drift. And it would really be nice if Vermont followed suit and passed their own law.
This legislation is really not following much. In other words, neonic application was not really regulated in New York State prior to the beginning of this year because there's so many loopholes in both the state laws and the federal laws. So now, finally we've got something that's workable.
To add that one thing gardeners can do is to buy organic seed, because even when the seed is when the seed is, most seeds, commercial seeds, are coated with this substance, it stays with the plant. It goes through the seedling into the mature plant, and just spraying the seeds can poison a lot of creatures. So look for something that's organic, that has not been sprayed. And if you go to one of the big box stores to get your plants for the season, make sure you get something that does say organic on it too. And that way you'll know that you're not putting out something that's going to poison a lot of the creatures that you're really trying to encourage.
Also, in terms of household uses, urban uses, those are basically prohibited now. So in other words, the exceptions for neonics will be in farming, but not in your front lawn, not in your garden.
Gardeners should, if you have been gardening for a while, you probably have a whole shelf full of chemicals, unless you're an organic gardener. So this is a good time to go and look and see what you have, and get rid of some of the things that probably you've been buying some of these brand names, and they probably have these neonics in them. So this is a time to get rid of them. Don't pour them down the drain. You have to look for a municipal waste day where you can take them and dispose of them.
Well, that's very important too. How do you dispose of these things if you don't want to use them anymore? Wow. I guess in New York City, we could call 311 and ask them for the dates, times, places to actually do this. Yes.
Lots of places have a 311.
Oh, okay, great. That I didn't know.
And the sanitation department, the sanitation department has maybe yearly or twice a year hazardous waste collection days where you can bring this stuff.
And this would be considered a hazardous waste then. It doesn't have to be oil, gasoline, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's poison.
And when they actually do this hazardous day, do they have a list that we could look at? So that I'm sure, so that I become positive that I'm bringing the right, I'm not wasting my time. I am going there with something and it will be accepted.
It usually is advertised, and they do give you a list of things to bring and things not to bring.
Just wanted to mention something about for every piece of legislation, there's a coalition generally that forms to push it through. So there were, in fact, a lot of farmers who were part of that coalition to move this forward. I'm sure there were plenty of farmers who were against it. But also another group was the brewers, beer brewers and craft brewers. Many of them wanted this to move forward. Plus, of course, environmental organizations, some municipalities, things like that. So it was a pretty strong coalition, included a lot of health experts, even chefs.
Thank you, Mark, for that explanation of the Birds and Bees Protection Act. And now I know you have another piece of legislation you wanted to talk about, which is the right to repair legislation. And you're telling me that according to the National Conference of State Legislators, 33 states and Puerto Rico considered right to repair legislation during the 2023 legislative session. Rights to repair legislation is directed at the ability of consumers to repair their own products instead of going back to the original manufacturer for service. Right to repair legislation includes bills addressing specific products like wheelchairs and those targeting broader categories such as medical, digital, or agricultural equipment. The measures often include language on what tools, parts, software, or instructions that the manufacturers should provide to independent repairers or product owners so that they may repair the products they own themselves. Although the Great Depression of the 1930s caused enormous difficulties for many, one of the greatest positive outcomes from that time period was the rise of the do it yourselfers. In other words, people in the Depression couldn't afford to have their cars or radios or other household products fixed by professionals. So they learned to repair things themselves. This resourcefulness saved them precious limited funds, gave them independence of a sort, and was considered a virtue. In recent decades, however, manufacturers have minimized the abilities of consumers to repair many common and expensive items, from the electronic systems in automobiles to television sets, computers, cameras, and other mechanical electrical products. Many citizens and consumers feel undermined by this loss of ability to repair products that they paid good money for. And the battle cry of those who would like to repair their own products is, let's fix our own stuff. So, Mark, can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure, it's a very important piece of legislation, as you can see.
Oh,
If
and again, this
33,
is, if I can interrupt again, this is the New York State law we're talking about only?
oh no, we're talking about multiple laws.
Multiple,
The
okay.
best of them actually is from the state of California. So
Ah,
I'll talk
okay.
about that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Um,
continue.
so basically, I've looked at this legislation for a long time, but never really from an environmental point of view. I saw it more as a consumer issue. And I heard the complaints about it long ago about people not being able to repair the electric or electrical components on their vehicles. In other words, people who used to like to tinker with their cars and repair their cars, they were faced with modules that they couldn't even physically get to, and were not really able to repair on their own. So that led to a lot of complaints. But there are serious environmental aspects of this legislation that I hadn't considered. One is the waste that's going into our waste stream. And in addition, when you're wasting products, when you're throwing away products before their lifespan is over, then you've got a whole new manufacturing process to create new versions of the same gadget or utility vehicle or farm equipment or radio, television, whatever it is. And that leads to a mining process, mining minerals, metals out of the earth that becomes incredibly expensive. And there's all sorts of yet another waste stream coming from all of these mines. Another group of individuals who are going to labor to assemble the products. Another big part of the waste stream for shipping them from China, Japan, Mexico, or some other part of the world to the United States. So basically, electronic waste is becoming the fastest growing waste stream in the world. But manufacturers make it hard for us to keep our stuff in use for longer periods of time. You've heard the expression, what is it, obsolescence, premature obsolescence.
I think it's called
Manufacturers
planned. I think it's called
planned
planned obsolescence.
obsolescence.
And the Moody Blues did that as a record album back in, the 1970s, I believe.
Yeah, okay, right. So that's yet another factor. So the right to repair actually relates to shipping, it relates to pollution, it relates to mining, and many aspects of our economy. So only about 15 to 20% of our electric waste is recycled, is what I've heard. Although I suspect it's actually less than that. But Americans dispose of over 400,000 cell phones every single day. So it might seem like a small thing, but it does add up. And and that's just one type of electronic waste that's growing so rapidly, not only in the United States, but as other countries develop and they move from being low income countries to moderate income countries that are consuming more and more.
you just mentioned the cell phones. That's the primary thing that I think was being targeted by this, because there's a lot of hazardous materials in cell phones, and if you just keep throwing them away, you're creating hazardous waste. But also, most of the manufacturers required that you went back to them to repair it. And whether or not you could repair it yourself, there's a lot of potential businesses out there and people who are repair people that maybe don't work for the cell phone manufacturers but have their own businesses. So it's actually helping small businesses to survive as well. Because you may not want to pull apart your cell phone on your own, but you could bring it now to a guy down, in the strip mall rather than having to send it back to the manufacturer.
That's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's very important. Not only that, but the manufacturers, for example, Harley Davidson, Westinghouse, they're voiding the warranties on the products that they're selling you if you use an independent repair person, or if you try to repair it yourself, or if you use a different type of a part from some other manufacturer. But Ken, did you have a comment?
Yeah. I've done several radio shows on the right to repair. One of which was about New York's right to repair, which went through both houses of the state Senate and the Assembly almost unanimously. Republican and Democrat alike wanted people to have the right to repair. Uh, I I don't understand why you even need a law to have the right to repair, but your own stuff. But anyway, uh, and the governor Hochul started stripping things out of it, so that when she finally signed it, it was only a small portion of things that people were allowed to repair. But what's been happening nationwide, the states are leading the federal government in right to repair laws. They tend to be only for a few items in each state, but there's more and more of them, to the point where now there's federal legislation that's being proposed. And so we may actually have a right to repair nationwide. And I want to point out how this lack of the right, has killed people. Because when COVID first started, people said there weren't enough ventilators for all the people who got COVID that needed ventilators to keep them alive. The reason they didn't have ventilators is that they weren't allowed to repair them. And there
Wow.
were so many that needed to be repaired and not the people to do it, that people did not have ventilators. So this has far-reaching consequences. And computers, and if you have to mine to get the parts for this equipment again, all right, there's more water pollution, more air pollution, more people with an unhealthy job, because if the stuff was lasting, you would need to mine the stuff so often. And the one funny story from what I've heard is that there's a lot of kids who are sons and daughters of farmers, and they don't want to farm. Mom and dad work so hard. I don't want to work that hard. I'm going into computers. And then they find out that their computer skills allow their parents to hack their farm equipment so their farm equipment can last a little longer.
Unbelievable.
So that's another part of the bill. It's not just electronic equipment or automobiles. It is some of these big, very expensive pieces of farm equipment. So of the 33 states that considered such legislation last year, it failed in many of them. I'll say it: Connecticut, Oregon,
Yep. Yep.
South Dakota, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia, and Missouri. And just specifically bills to require to be able to repair your own farm equipment failed in Florida, Maryland, and Montana. So there's a lot of lobbying against it. Really, the best bill out there is the one from California. And so that bill requires manufacturers to provide the means to diagnose, maintain, or repair for 7 years all products with price points over $100. So that's pretty comprehensive. And that's the law that should move forward in as many states as possible. Of the others, Minnesota enacted a Digital Fair Repair Act. Colorado has a Repair Act for agricultural equipment and wheelchairs. And New York requires manufacturers to provide consumers with
Right.
parts or tools for electronic equipment manufactured for the first time and sold or used in New York. So there's a little bit of an asterisk there.
I've heard from other environmentalists that there are certain groups that are sharing in this right to repair and have been doing that for a while. One of them is the Sierra Club. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, that would be Marilyn more than me, but certainly there are repair shops popping up here and there to help consumers, to repair their products.
Yeah, there are people taking the law in their own hands and repairing their own bicycles and repairing their own computers and cell phones. They're just getting together somewhere and doing it, and you have to search the internet and hope that the people who own the equipment don't find them first.
And there is this maker movement out there. You might find, I know we have one in Staten Island, but there in other places, maker spaces where people are taught how to use equipment so they can fix things and make things, but also part of it is to fix things. And every once in a while they'll have these kind of pop-up, bring in your old radio or bicycle or whatever it is that you want to fix, and they'll.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's done on a fairly regular basis in Westchester and probably in New York City too. But there's repair cafes, they call them, and there are really knowledgeable volunteers who will fix your lamp. I went and I had a pair of lamps and one of them didn't work. So I took the one that was not working and came back with a good working pair after that. Nothing to the landfill and nothing to buy new, which is what we always want. So look for the Repair Cafe. And the ones that I know around here are run by a Sierra Club volunteer, but I'm sure other places are doing it as well.
Now, are they charging for this?
No, it's all free. It's all free.
Oh my goodness, that's great.
Times helps people repair their bicycles in I think the East Village in Brooklyn.
The volunteers that are there repairing things encourage people to come on over, let me show you how to do this, which is also nice. The lamp repair was difficult, and it was more than I would be able to do, but he was very cheerful about going ahead and fixing it so I could have a nice lamp to take back for my pair.
Ken and I both went to a Maker Faire exhibition in Queens a few years back. We videoed that, made a video of it. They are incredibly friendly, wonderful people, and they are so creative, so imaginative, and they just keep espousing on a daily basis, and then they show their effects on a yearly basis. And that's all over the world. They just do not exist here in New York State or New York City. That's incredible. Do you remember anything about that, Ken?
Oh, yeah, I have vivid memories of learning about all different ways that things are being created, not just repaired, but created in such a way that you don't have to repair something. You can take pieces and make something else out of it. And then there's people who take like shipping crates and turn them into houses.
Right. And the glass bottles, plastic bottles, they made whole houses out of that. Remember?
Yeah.
And the containers, I remember that too. That was incredible.
So wonderful creative stuff going on, and all relatively under the radar. I talked to the organizer, and we were talking about corporate sponsorship, and they don't have corporate sponsorship, and I can see why. Corporations are not going to like this kind of under the radar, helping people do things for themselves.
I'll just make a last comment about the right to repair. In the state of California, where it was passed, California PIRG, Public Interest Research Group, was one of the groups lobbying for that. And they estimated it's going to repair California residents, going to save them about $5 billion a year in repair costs. So I wanted to mention a positive development related to the Endangered Species Act from early 2024. Basically, a lot of protections for endangered species were rolled back under the previous presidential administration. But uh, just over the past month, some of these protections have been restored. So they give the federal government more leeway to designate plants or animals as being endangered or threatened. So by context, the Endangered Species Act was enacted 51 years ago and signed into law by President Nixon. So it's helped us to protect species like the bald eagle, like the California condor. So under the previous administration, uh, much consideration was given to economic hardships or difficulties to, the timber industry, the mining industry, etc. So that bumped a number of species off. So therefore they were denying protections to many species. So under the new change here in 2024, basically they're saying that endangered or threatened species should be based upon science. I mean, how many of these various birds or plants or animals do we have left? And are they repopulating at a significant enough level? So the economic considerations are more or less much, much less than they were before. So more species will be able to be protected. And the second part of it is that they brought back the blanket rule, which allows them to give full endangered protections to species that are merely threatened. And so to me, that's a very good thing. And we have, tens of thousands of species at risk in the United States. So this is going to impact quite a lot of bird species, plant species, tree, vegetation, wildlife species. So I thought it was a positive thing, and I wanted to mention that. March of 2024, the state of California passed a bill called Coexist with Wildlife Act. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. In fact, I'll read just a bit from it because it's worded in such a beautiful way. Basically, they're saying that it's been 100 years since the loss of the California grizzly bear. And they're saying, whereas the loss of this magnificent creature that is the symbol of the state of California, it's a reminder of how easily California wildlife and wild places can disappear, and how humans play such an integral role in safeguarding our fellow creatures and their habitats. So basically, California is the most populous and biodiverse state, 39 million people, over 27,000 plant and animal species. So the legislation is to celebrate the incredible biodiversity of California, from the Sierra Nevadas to the sea and everything in between, and to call upon Californians to conserve and restore wildlife habitats that will allow species to thrive. So in 2024, the state challenges all Californians to take action by learning about local wildlife, planting pollinator gardens, engaging with local preservation and conservation organizations, writing to your elected representatives about conservation policies, minimizing your impact by leaving no trace, and giving wildlife their needed space, and talking to others about what you've learned. So I thought that was a beautiful thing and wanted to share it with you.
Now we're going to change topics and talk about gardening. And we have a wonderful gardener to tell us all about it. And she has sent in so many graphics on gardening. She has about 2/3 of an acre, half an acre to 2/3 of an acre in her home area. And she, every year, and has been doing this for a number of years, gardening. And she wishes to teach us about the philosophy of gardening. So Marilyn, take it away.
Thank you, Charlie. Most people, when they hear me talking, hear me talking about nuclear power. So today it's nice to go into another very important environmental issue. And it was a nice change in our last program to hear Lenny talking about nuclear power and doing it so competently. We need more people doing that and thinking about it. It's time for people to speak up and talk about environmental issues if we are going to continue with life on this planet. We owe it to these other species so that they can survive and thrive, because we're just so much poorer without them. And finding ways to do that is one of the most difficult tricks in modern life. So, keeping all that in mind, I would like to invite you into my garden and talk about gardening and seeds today. This program started out with winter sowing, and you can see a brief clip of that in our last program. And there's a lot written. A lot of other people are talking about winter sowing too. But here's just a quick overview, because I want to take that winter sowing to spring and see how we can use it. And you have plenty of time to think about it, because winter sowing usually runs from January to maybe March, the end of March or thereabouts. I first discovered winter gardening when I planted some lettuce. It was black-seeded Simpson, which is a heritage hybrid, and let some of the plants go to seed, because the pollinators like the blooms, and I thought, well, they're pretty, why not just leave them? Well, the next spring, what came up was a bunch of lettuce that I totally did not expect or see. And we had very early lettuce from that. I recognized what it was, and I let it grow, and it was some of the best lettuce we'd ever have. So if you're putting something out and you want to do it early, you can use a cold hardy plant like lettuce. I planted some black-seeded Simpson lettuce seeds before the last snow, and I also planted a red variety, and I'm happy to report that they're up already. That's how cold hardy they are. And if the temperature goes down, they won't care. Even if they wilt a bit, they'll come right back. So it's a really good way to have something early when you're dying to get your hands in the dirt, if you are a gardener already. I did some reading about degree days too. Ken mentioned that briefly. It can be kind of confusing, but here's what I found out. Plants have a developmental rate that is so dependent on smaller differences in temperature, much more so than I'd ever realized. And what are degree days? Well, they start with a base temperature, which is the lowest temperature at which a plant will grow. And a common base for many plants is 50 degrees. And they have a maximum temperature when the growth slows down. What I took away from reading about degree days was that plants have a range from about 50 degrees to 86 degrees. So even though tomatoes like it hot and sunny, gardeners know that if you have growing them in your backyard, but when it gets above that 86 degrees, even tomatoes slow down. So this year I can plan on giving them a bit of shade so they can keep growing and producing through the 90-degree heat waves that we've been having. Now that it is warmer and getting warmer, I want to experiment with, and I encourage you to do the same thing if you have the space and time and interest, with starting some of our less cold hardy crops, but doing it in the way that was very successful with the winter seeding. I'm going to get some using the same plastic jugs, put some dirt in them, and use some seeds that are like zinnia and squash that are less cold hardy. But since it's not getting so cold anymore, I think that if I tape the jug back up and just leave it outside, I may get some seedlings that require very little watering or care, just like in winter sowing. If you're sowing outside and sowing directly, you need to wait. You need to wait until you have 5 days of 50-degree temperature so that the soil can warm up and your seeds won't rot in the ground. So starting some things like the warm weather crops in the milk jugs using the winter sowing techniques may give a jump on the season. We will see.
There's some very basic little tools like a thermometer. There are soil thermometers that you can get very inexpensively, and then you'll know how warm your soil is, and that's key to whether a seed will sprout or not, is the soil temperature.
Yes, and you also need something like a rain gauge, which tells you how much you need to continue to water, or if you've watered enough. There are all kinds of rain gauges, and I have found that in my yard they can grow in that I can get. I found it in my yard that you get different amounts of water in different places depending on how the wind blows and where the trees are and where the house is. So it's good to have a couple of rain gauges around, or put one on your patio or deck to see how much, if you're growing plants there, to see how much rain you get.
It's, there's such a thing as microclimates too. As you say, certain parts of your yard, which isn't a huge space, but certain parts will get more rain than others, and certain areas, the soil might be warmer in one area than another, might get more sun than one area or another, might get more or less wind than the other area. So you have kind of microclimates everywhere, even in a small garden,
You do.
that you know help you decide what to plant where.
Mhm. The if you have a piece of property, it can be unique if you look at it. It doesn't have to be all turf and mugo pines and other things that you see so frequently in the suburbs. If you look carefully, you find these little microclimates, and you can plant things sometimes that would grow in much more south. But if they're on the south side of your house and protected, you can have some lovely southern blooms as well. I was going to say that in regard to seed planting, if seeds if your space is really limited, you can plant your seeds in a larger container rather than in the individual pots, and you can sow them quite thickly, so that if you can have one, rather than have one seed in a pot, or maybe two, one doesn't come up, and then you've wasted quite a while waiting for the germination. If you plant them thickly, then you've got a whole bunch of baby plants and plenty that for whatever use you want, but you do have to be very careful when you separate them so that you don't damage the roots. And then you pot them up, and you've maybe saved yourself some time and given yourself a lot of other extra plants to keep or to throw away, not to throw away, but to give away, which is always nice.
What is the difference between community garden and backyard gardening? I seem to know people who know just one or the other. What are they both like together?
Well, if you Marilyn mentioned earlier that you might not have space to grow because you live in an apartment or the upstairs of a house or something. And throughout the country, and it used to be just in the major cities, but now every little town seems to have a community garden. And basically, it's a group of people gardening in the same space, and they can decide how to divide up that space amongst themselves. But in other words, when you don't have a space to grow at home, you'd have a space to grow in a garden.
Are they doing what Marilyn's doing?
Oh, absolutely. You're still a gardener. You're just doing it on borrowed land, for lack of a better term. You're usually it's municipal property. Sometimes it's church property. Sometimes it's private land. But you're a gardener, and that's what Marilyn is talking about, being a gardener. And it doesn't matter where you do it. You're still gardening.
Terms of water requirements for various plants. I note that in the say the American Southwest or the Great Plains, where there's drought, certain crops are not getting permits to be grown. For example, hay, which takes a lot of water. If I want to be water efficient in my own garden, what plants should I avoid or favor?
In the Northeast, we are lucky to have, generally speaking, ample water. We do have a dry period during August usually, but it depends so much on your property and on the soil. So I would hesitate to give anybody a list of plants, particularly, for what you're talking about. However, native plants thrive and survive and get by very much on their own. So looking at native plants like echinacea, coneflower, and things like that would certainly be a good addition to anybody's. One of the other things that you might want to think about as a gardener is rain barrels and how you can redo the gutters on your house and have a lot of that water go right into a rain barrel that you can use and store. I have some 50-gallon rain barrels. No, they're more than that. I think they're 70 gallon rain barrels that are sistered together. So I collect that water and then use it as needed. You have to be careful to elevate them. To make it easy to get under the spigot to get your watering can there. But you'll see some pictures of what it looks like. It's not hard. Like most things environmental, it can be very simple and yet very, very effective.
When you mentioned native plants, I thought of the Xerces Society, XERCES, and they supply native plants for people. The organization is oriented towards pollinators, butterflies and bees, but they realize that you put out native plants, you're helping like everything. But I just wanted to give a plug to the Xerces Society because they're walking the walk.
Yes, don't they specialize in plants that don't need water, very much water?
Well, they specialize in native plants because they want to help the native butterflies. And they know that you can't just plant flowers, you have to plant whatever the caterpillars need. So you can find out what plants the caterpillars need, what butterflies are in your area, and then get the plants that support those butterflies.
Good.
The,
We'll have to put a link to that. Lenny?
The Xerces Society just announced grants to groups in the Northeast, where each group was going to get somewhere between 500 and 1,000 little plugs, but native plants to plant at their project. We got one for the Native Plant Society of Staten Island, and there's a group in Queens and a group in Manhattan that also got these grants. So exactly as you're saying, Ken, they're realizing that if they want to help the butterflies, and their full name is the Xerces Conservation International for Invertebrates.
What about seeds and what might grow in your garden? Well, I have mentioned the black-seeded Simpson lettuce. And black-seeded Simpson it's been around for a long time and it grows well. And now's a good time to plant it. So I would suggest that along with red salad bowl lettuce. And you can get a good loose leaf blend. These happen to be from Burpee, which is another good source. And if you have a patio or if you have a deck, you can get a big pot and plant some there and grow yourself some salad greens right there. What else is good? I really like upland cress. That grows and that's another good salad mix. This one has a fairly short maturity date, so you can start eating it right away. Swiss chard, chives.
Oh.
And if you have space on a deck or a patio, you can grow some cucumbers, which is fun. It's a good vine, and give them a pot and some dirt and they're ready to go. Another good way to get seeds is to go to seed swaps, and many of the garden clubs will have them. I got parsnip seeds, which I've never grown before, and I'm going to try those this year. When the weather's a little warmer, I'll plant them directly in the garden. Here's another good source. It's called Johnny's Selected Seeds, and they're a company-run business. So they're good to work with. They have good products, and they're organic, which is nice. So I think I can stop there. You get the idea of what's going on. And like any other kind of advocacy, it's hard to do it by yourself. So joining a garden club is a really, really good idea. I belong to the Yorktown Garden Club. They have a great website. They plan a lot of good things that keep you gardening and keep you interested and keep you in the company of gardeners. So whether you're gardening or doing something else activist for the environment, it's good to get together and do it with other people. You're more powerful that way. You can, if you don't know of a garden club near you, you can actually just Google garden clubs near me and get some ideas about what about what's around and what you might have choices for. And the last thing I want to mention is plant sales. They're coming up usually around Mother's Day. So it's a while away, but remember those garden sales, because when garden clubs do these sales, you can get really interesting plants and you get plants that are really locally grown. So they should do well in your area. So find a garden club, find some seed swaps, find other people that like to garden. And I want to thank everybody for joining me for a tour of my garden. And Lenny, you really are a gardener and you really know a lot. Do you have any comments that you'd like to add to this?
Just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Yeah. Mark, do you have any favorite plants?
Oh boy, I just have indoor plants. I'll say that where I'm living in Staten Island, my neighbors were trying to garden out in it's a nice big backyard with lots of southern sun. And the landlord said, no, you can't use the water. So that was the end of that project
Oh.
after a summer.
Oh, would rain barrels work, do you think?
That probably could have helped these folks who are gardening. It might have, yeah.
Yeah,
But they were
okay.
just
Well, I hope that,
discouraged.
yeah. So if you have any questions or any comments, when you see this video, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you have any topics that you'd like to see covered, let us know. You have environmentalists here who are really actively out working for the earth. And we'd love to hear from you and love to think about what you love to know what you think about what you're hearing. And thank you for sticking with us and tuning in. And we all look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Well, that's about it for this episode of the Environment TV Forum. We hope that you enjoyed it, and please feel free to contact us with your thoughts and comments. We believe that the environment covers the entire universe, and that an environmental communications network is the least that we can build to help describe that universe. Until that time, we will do our part in bringing to you, the viewer, as much as we can, and we welcome your involvement in making that happen. So if you want to become part of this and build such an environmental communications network, you can contact us at the link on your screen. Until next time, enjoy nature and all that it has to offer before it's too late. I'm Charlie Olson, the Environment TV Forum.